The freight elevator in the basement of Harlow & Co. smelled exactly the way I remembered: citrus cleaning spray, fresh linen, and the faint ghost of last night's dinner service. I'd spent 3 years with that smell in my clothes before I ever sat at a table upstairs. A young woman in a white server's shirt nearly walked into me as the doors opened. She caught herself, steadied her tray, and glanced up with an apologetic smile. "Sorry about that. You must be the new addition to the brunch service?" I smiled back. "Something like that." She held the door for me, and I stepped into the corridor that led to the prep kitchen, the same corridor I'd walked 1,000 times before, just never in a cream blazer and silk blouse. I'd worn an apron here once. A name tag that said Diane, because the manager back then thought my real name was too hard to pronounce quickly during a rush. "My name is Mei-Lin Park. And Harlow & Co. is mine. Not in the sentimental sense, not in the I worked here once and it holds a place in my heart sense. I mean, I own it. I acquired the entire Harlow Group 14 months ago through my hospitality investment firm: 3 restaurants, 2 event spaces, and a boutique inn in the Hudson Valley. The ink was barely dry before I quietly updated the staff benefits package, replaced the manager who couldn't pronounce my name, and raised minimum wage across all locations. My son had no idea his engagement brunch was being held at one of my properties. His fiancée's family had chosen it. Of course they had. The Harlow name carried weight in this city, and from everything my son had told me about them, weight was exactly what they were looking for. I had taken my time getting dressed that morning. Not because I was nervous. I hadn't been nervous in a negotiation room in over a decade, but because I was curious. My son loved this woman. He told me so in the careful, measured way he inherited from me. "Mom, I think she's it." That was enough for me to take the day seriously. I'd chosen the blazer deliberately. Understated, clean lines. Nothing that announced itself before I was ready. The kitchen was already at full speed when I stepped through the swinging door. Mise en place lined every counter. A sous chef was reducing something that smelled like a beurre blanc. The pastry team was arranging individual tarts on serving platters with the focused precision of surgeons. And standing in the middle of all of it, in a rose-colored dress that I recognized from last season's Saks catalog, was a woman I could only assume was my future daughter-in-law's mother. She was holding a printed seating chart, and frowning at it like it had personally offended her. "These centerpieces are cream," she said to no one in particular, then to the pastry chef directly. I specified ivory. "Those are not the same color." The pastry chef, a young man whose name tag read Eduardo, kept his face carefully neutral. "I can check the order form again, ma'am." "The order form is wrong, then." I spoke to someone on the phone. She set the seating chart down and turned around, and her eyes landed on me with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to cataloging people quickly. Her gaze swept from my blazer to my face to my hands, no visible jewelry except a simple watch, and something in her expression settled into mild dismissal. "Are you with the front of house team?" she asked. "I'm Mei-Lin," I said. "I'm here for the brunch." She blinked. "Oh," a pause, the kind that does a lot of work without saying much. "You're Daniel's mother." "I am." She studied me for a beat longer than necessary before extending her hand. "Carolyn Whitmore." Her grip was the kind that communicates assessment, not warmth. "I assumed you'd come through the main entrance." "I came in through the side," I said. Which was true. I'd wanted a few quiet minutes in the building before the event started. Old habit, I always walk a property before I sit down in it. "Well," Carolyn Whitmore glanced past me toward the corridor. "The family is gathering upstairs in the private dining room. The guests, I mean." Another pause. "I'm sure one of the staff can show you up." I smiled at her. "I'll find my way, thank you." She had already turned back to Eduardo and the centerpiece situation by the time I left. The private dining room at Harlow & Co. occupied the entire second floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park. I'd authorized a renovation 8 months ago that restored the original crown molding and replaced the dated carpet with reclaimed white oak. Standing at the top of the stairs, I thought, not for the first time, that the renovation team had done beautiful work. My son was there, near the window, talking with a man I didn't recognize. He saw me come in and crossed the room in 4 strides. "Mom." He hugged me the way he'd been hugging me since he was 11, a little too tight and for a second longer than necessary. "You look great." "You look nervous," I said. I'm not nervous. You've been touching your collar. He put his hand down self-consciously. Her dad is intense. Most dads are, when it's their daughter. He laughed, and some of the tension left his shoulders. I'd worked for that laugh. He'd been a serious kid and I'd worked hard to give him enough lightness that seriousness didn't harden into something else. His fiancée appeared at his elbow, a tall young woman with warm eyes and the kind of careful poise that suggests it was recently learned rather than inherited. She looked at me, and I saw something genuine flash across her face before the poise reasserted itself. Nerves. Real ones. Mrs. Park, she said. I'm so glad you're here. It's Mei-Lin, I told her. We've waited long enough to drop the formalities. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. My son had been right about her, I thought. There was something real in there, underneath whatever the Whitmore family had layered on top. I should tell you, she said quietly, leaning in slightly, my father can be a lot. Most fathers can, I said, echoing what I'd just told my son. Don't worry about me. She seemed to relax by a fraction, and the three of us moved together into the room. Richard Whitmore was, in his own estimation, a man worth knowing. This was apparent within about 40 seconds of introduction. He had the handshake of someone who had taken a seminar on handshakes, the eye contact of someone who'd read that sustained eye contact signals dominance, and the voice of a man who had never once worried about being heard. Daniel. He gripped my son's hand and shoulder simultaneously, looking sharp. Then he turned to me, and I watched the same assessment his wife had run downstairs happen again, faster. And this is the famous mother. Famous might be generous, I said. He laughed, the practiced laugh of someone who appreciates his own jokes by proxy. We've heard so much. Daniel tells us you're in business. He said the word with the particular inflection of a man who considered himself a serious businessman talking to someone in a different category of the concept. I am, I said. Hospitality. Was it? He was already glancing over my shoulder toward the window, toward someone more interesting arriving. Restaurants, or something along those lines. Something along those lines. Wonderful. His eyes had found their new target. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we'll find you a good seat. I think Carolyn put you near the actually, Carolyn. He raised his voice across the room. Where did you put Daniel's mother? Carolyn Whitmore drifted over with the seating chart. She scanned it briefly. I put her at the side table near the service door. More comfortable there, I thought. Quieter. The service door table was where I'd put the overflow seating during private events. It was technically in the room, but positioned so that the main dining arrangement faced away from it. Staff moved in and out of the adjacent corridor constantly during service. It was, in the hierarchy of table placement, the equivalent of being handed a card that said, "You are not quite part of this." My son started to say something. I touched his arm lightly. That sounds lovely, I said. Carolyn looked momentarily surprised by the absence of protest, then pleasantly self-satisfied. Good. We wanted everyone comfortable. I spent the next 20 minutes at my assigned table, watching. It's a skill I developed early, in rooms where I wasn't supposed to matter. You learn to be still. You learn to read a room from the outside of it. To watch how people position themselves around the people they consider important and away from the people they've already sorted into a lesser category. You learn that the most useful intelligence about a person is gathered in the moments they believe no one significant is watching. Richard held court near the window, cycling through a rotation of guests with the efficiency of a man working a fundraiser. His laugh was different with different people, louder for men he was trying to impress, softer and more confiding for women he was trying to charm. His wife moved beside him in practiced synchrony, adding context when he forgot a name, redirecting conversations that ran long. They were a unit built for social performance. Formidable, in their way. My future daughter-in-law moved between the two worlds of the room, her parents' orbit and my son's, with the practiced navigation of someone who had been doing this her whole life. Managing transitions. Smoothing edges. I recognized it. I'd done it myself, in different rooms, for different reasons. The young server who'd met me in the freight elevator appeared at my elbow. "Can I get you anything while you wait?" she asked quietly. Her name tag said Sophie. "Just water for now, thank you." "How long have you been with Harlow?" She glanced at me, slightly surprised by the question. 4 months. It's a good place to work, actually. They changed ownership recently and it's been different since then. Better. Different how? The managers actually listen now. She said it simply, factually, without performance. Before, if a guest was rude to you, you just took it. Now there's an actual process. And the pay is better. She caught herself, seeming to wonder if this was the appropriate conversation. Sorry. You didn't ask for my employment history. I asked how long you'd been here, I said. You answered the question behind the question. That's good instinct. She smiled, uncertain but pleased, and moved off to take another order. I watched Richard Whitmore pour himself a second whiskey at the sidebar and decide, apparently, that it was time to be inclusive. May. He crossed toward my table with the glass and an expansive gesture, as though visiting me was a generous act. The compression of my name, I'd introduced myself as Mei-Lin, was probably not intentional. We can't have you sitting over here all by yourself. Come. I want to introduce you to some people. I followed him into the main body of the room, curious about what version of introduction he had in mind. Everyone, this is Daniel's mother. He presented me to a cluster of couples with the amiable vagueness of a man who has not retained a surname. She's in the restaurant business, so she'll appreciate a place like this. He gestured broadly at the room. Harlow & Co., do you know it? The Harlow Group? Extraordinary family. Old New York. Generations of this. That's what I call a hospitality legacy. The Harlow family actually sold the group, one of the women in the cluster said. She was older, sharp-eyed, with the particular precision of someone who reads business news. Couple of years ago, I think. Or recently, I lose track. Sold it? Richard frowned. To whom? Some investment firm. She shrugged. Kept the name, obviously. Shame, Richard said, with the authority of a man who had no stake in the matter. These old establishments should stay in the family. That's what gives them character. He looked at me with the expression of someone doing the favor of including you in a conversation. I'm sure you understand that, in your line of work. The personal touch. The small business. I understand the personal touch, I said. Yes. Character, he said again, nodding. Can't buy that. You'd be surprised what you can buy, I said pleasantly. He laughed, deciding this was a joke, and the cluster laughed with him. Brunch was served family style, which meant the service door table became slightly less isolated as platters moved around the room. Sophie and two other servers worked the floor with the efficient quiet that good service requires, present without intruding, responsive without hovering. I watched Richard Whitmore stop Sophie mid-circuit to tell her that the brioche was cold, that this was unacceptable, and that she should make sure it was corrected immediately, in the tone of someone who has decided that service staff are an appropriate outlet for the ambient frustration of daily life. Sophie said, "Of course, sir, I'll take care of that right away," and did not change her expression by a single millimeter. She caught my eye for half a second as she turned, and I saw, briefly, the effort that neutrality required. I had worn that neutrality myself. I knew what it cost. My son was seated across the main table from his fiancée, which meant he was seated next to Richard Whitmore. I watched my son's jaw tighten slightly when Richard stopped Sophie. My son had been raised to say thank you to people in service roles. He had been raised by a woman who used to be one. Richard. Carolyn touched her husband's arm. I wanted to ask you, the Pemberton event, next Friday, are we confirmed? It was a redirect, and a practiced one. I noted it. Whatever else Carolyn Whitmore was, she was not unaware of her husband's behavior. She managed it. That was its own kind of information. I turned to the woman seated nearest me, an aunt of my future daughter-in-law, who had introduced herself as Patricia and immediately begun telling me about a cruise she was planning. I let her talk. I asked questions. She was, underneath the social camouflage of the event, a genuinely warm person who loved her niece and was nervous about this lunch going well. She really does love your son, Patricia told me in a lower voice, somewhere between the appetizers and the main course. I was worried. Honestly, this whole family business can be a lot. But when she talks about him, she's different. More herself. He's good at that, I said, making people feel like they can be themselves. He gets that from somewhere, Patricia said, and looked at me with more attention than she'd paid me before. Probably, I agreed. Richard Whitmore cleared his throat at the head of the table. He had, apparently, decided it was time for remarks. "I want to say a few words about this remarkable young couple," he began, and the room quieted the way rooms do when someone with a large voice stops asking and starts announcing. "My daughter is exceptional. We've always known it. And she's chosen a man who works hard." The pause was minimal, but present. The particular pause that contains the unspoken comparative. Who works hard considering. "We're glad to welcome Daniel into our family circle." He raised his glass. The room raised theirs. "And of course," Richard added, with the magnanimity of a man tossing a coin, "we're glad to meet his family today. It takes a village." He smiled broadly toward my table. "Isn't that right, Mei? My name is Mei-Lin." The room waited. My son had stopped touching his collar and was now completely still in the way that meant he was deciding whether to say something. I set down my water glass. "It does take a village," I said. "Funny you should mention it. I've been thinking about this building all morning. I always think about the people who keep something running. The kitchen team that started at 5 this morning. Sophie and the servers who have been on their feet since setup. Eduardo in the pastry kitchen who got the centerpieces right even when someone told him they were wrong." I paused, pleasantly. "This particular village has been working very hard today." Richard chuckled, reading this as charming. "Well, yes. The staff here is very good. The Harlow name guarantees a certain—" "The Harlow family sold the group," the sharp-eyed woman said again. "Yes, you mentioned." Richard waved a hand. "Still, the name means something. The current ownership has actually invested quite a bit in the staff," I said. "New benefits structure. A formal process for handling guest conduct. Better pay across all locations." I took a small sip of water. "I reviewed all of it personally." Richard looked at me. "You reviewed it?" "I did." "In what capacity?" The table had gotten quieter than brunch tables normally get. My future daughter-in-law had gone very still. My son, I noticed from the corner of my eye, had the expression he'd had at 12 when he was watching a movie and had figured out the ending 20 minutes early and was waiting for everyone else to catch up. "In the capacity of owner," I said. "My firm acquired the Harlow Group 14 months ago. This building, the 2 event spaces on Madison and in Brooklyn, and the inn upstate. You're eating in my restaurant, Richard. The staff you've been directing today work for me." The silence that followed was the specific silence of a room recalibrating. Carolyn set down her fork. Richard's glass was halfway to his mouth and stayed there. He put the glass down. "I don't understand." "Daniel said you were in hospitality," I confirmed. "Something along those lines." Patricia, to her credit, made a sound that was almost certainly a suppressed laugh. "The investment firm," the sharp-eyed woman said. She was looking at me with the expression of someone completing a puzzle. "MLP Group." "That's us," I said. "Mei-Lin Park." She said my full name, correctly, with the satisfaction of someone who reads business news and is now very glad she does. I read the acquisition announcement. I didn't connect the name. "Most people don't," I said. "I find it useful." Richard Whitmore's face had moved through several colors and settled on something between red and the particular gray of someone reconsidering a number of recent choices simultaneously. "Now, look." He found his voice with the effort of a man accustomed to having it available on demand. "If we'd known." "Then what?" My son said quietly. It wasn't loud. My son doesn't raise his voice when he's serious, he lowers it, which he also learned from me. The table heard him anyway. "Then what, Richard?" he continued. "You would have given her the table by the window? You would have learned to pronounce her name?" "Daniel," his fiancée said softly. "Not a rebuke, a check-in. She's been sitting at the service door table for the last hour," my son said. "My mother. At her own restaurant. I didn't know it was her," Richard started. "That's the point," my son said. The room sat with that for a moment. I looked at my future daughter-in-law. She was looking at her hands, and I could see something working behind her face, not calculation, which would have been easy to dismiss. Something harder and more honest. I'd seen it in the mirror once, a long time ago. In the break room of this building, when I'd overheard someone describing me to a manager as that girl who can barely speak English and had to decide in real time who I was going to be about it. "I owe you an apology," she said. She looked up, and she looked directly at me. "The table." The way my parents have treated you today. I should have said something earlier and I didn't, and I'm sorry. Carolyn made a small sharp sound. Sweetheart, you don't need to. I do, she said, and there was something in her voice that I recognized, the sound of a person deciding not to take the easier road. I should have introduced her properly at the beginning. I should have said something when the seating arrangement was made. I knew it wasn't right and I let it go because I was trying to keep things smooth, and that was a choice and it was the wrong one. The room was very quiet. Mom. My son looked at me. She's right, I said simply, to him. And she said it herself, which matters. I turned to Richard. His face had settled into the stillness of a man who is not accustomed to being on the wrong side of a room and is deciding how to process it. I don't want anything from you, I told him. Not a board seat, not a business arrangement, not a formal apology in front of these people if that's not what you actually mean. That's not why I told you. I paused. I told you because my son is going to marry your daughter. And I'd like us to know who we actually are to each other before that happens. That seemed more useful than a comfortable misunderstanding. Richard was quiet. My mother came to this country at 22 with 2 suitcases and a food handler's permit. I continued. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with 4 people in it. I worked in this building as a server before I owned it. And I will tell you honestly that the work I did then was harder and more important than most of what I do now. The people in that kitchen today started earlier than anyone in this room, and they will finish later. That's not a sad story. That's a foundation. I looked at Sophie, who had appeared near the service door and was pretending to be very interested in a serving tray. It was a good foundation. Sophie looked up briefly and then back down, and I thought I saw something relax in her shoulders. I'm going to ask you all to do something before we have dessert, I said to the table. And I mean everyone in this room, not just the Whitmore family. I'd like each of you to learn the first name of every person on the service staff today, and use it when you say thank you. That's all. That's my one ask. Patricia said, immediately and without any hesitation whatsoever. I already know Sophie. Sophie laughed from the doorway, startled out of her professional composure. The sound broke something in the room's atmosphere, and a few other people laughed too, and the table shifted in the way that rooms do when they decide collectively to go a different direction. Richard Whitmore found me by the window after dessert, while the room was beginning its slow dissolve into goodbyes and coat retrieval. He had the bearing of a man who has been thinking about how to approach something for a while. I'd like to apologize, he said. For the table. For he stopped. Tried again. I made assumptions. You did, I agreed. It was a mistake. I studied him. He was uncomfortable, but he was here, making the actual effort, which was more than some people managed. It was, I said. The thing about assumptions is they're usually not really about the person you're assuming about. They're about what you've decided the world looks like. Today gave you some new information. He looked at his glass. You could have said something immediately. When you arrived. I could have, I said. But then I wouldn't have learned anything about who you are when you think it doesn't matter. I tilted my head slightly. And neither would you. He was quiet for a moment. Your son is a good man. He learned it, I said. From people who taught him that it applied in every room, not just the ones where it was easy. Richard nodded. Slowly, like a man absorbing something he'd heard but not processed in real time. I thought there might be more there to work with than I'd expected. That happens sometimes. People you'd categorized one way had layers you couldn't see from the outside. It didn't erase the morning. But it was something. I'd like to take you to dinner, he said. All of us. Next week. Properly. I'd like that, I said. As long as you let me choose the restaurant. He made a face that was almost self-aware. Yours? I have a place in the West Village, I said. The linguine is extraordinary. The chef's been with us for 6 years and she started in the dish pit. I smiled. Full circle. My future daughter-in-law found me near the coat check as the event wound down. She changed something in how she was standing, less performance, more herself, which tracked with what Patricia had told me and with what I'd watched her choose to do at the table. I meant what I said, she told me. The apology. I know, I said. That's why it worked. She hesitated. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Did you know this was going to happen today? That they'd. She paused, choosing words. That it would go this way? I thought about the cream blazer I'd chosen that morning. About the freight elevator, about 20 years of rooms where I'd learned to be useful in the silence before I was needed. I thought there was a reasonable chance, I said. First impressions are honest. I'd rather know who I'm dealing with than have everyone on their best behavior. She absorbed this. And what did you find out? That your parents are people who make assumptions and have not been frequently challenged on them, I said. That's fixable, if they decide to fix it. And that you, when it mattered, chose honesty over comfort. I held her gaze. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. She looked like she might cry, which she clearly didn't want to do, and managed not to. I don't want to be the kind of person who lets things go to keep the peace. Then don't be, I said simply. You already know how to not be. You showed me that today. My son appeared beside her, put his hand on the small of her back, and looked at me with the question that had been in his face since the table. We good? He asked. We're good, I said. He exhaled. Although I added, you could have warned me that we were having this brunch at one of my own restaurants. I genuinely didn't know, he said, and the laughter in his voice was real. I swear. She picked it. My future daughter-in-law covered her face briefly with one hand. I picked it because I read a review that said it had the best eggs Benedict in the city. They're very good, I confirmed. Eduardo developed that recipe. You should tell him you liked it when you see him. I will, she said. And I believed her. Sophie caught me on my way out, near the service corridor where we'd started the morning. She had a tray tucked under her arm and the particular alertness of someone finishing a long shift. I don't know what just happened up there, she said, but the whole kitchen is talking about it. Nothing happened, I said. Someone got corrected and the room survived it. She looked at me. You really used to work here. As a server, I cleared that table by the window for 3 years, I said. Before that I did prep in the kitchen. Before that I washed dishes. And now you own it. And now I own it. I paused. Those things are connected, not in spite of each other. The dish pit is the best education in a restaurant you can get. You learn what every single person in the building actually does. She thought about this. Is that why you knew my name? Before I told you. Your name tag, I said. But also yes. I know what it means when someone takes the time to learn your name in a room where they don't have to. She nodded slowly, the way people do when something confirms what they half knew but hadn't fully articulated. Keep going, I told her. Whatever it is you're working toward. Keep going. I took the main staircase out that time, through the front door, past the host stand where the afternoon team was beginning their setup, past the bar where the light came through the window the way I'd always thought it should, past the host who said, "Have a wonderful afternoon," and I said thank you, same to you, and meant it. Outside, the city was doing what cities do in the early afternoon, moving, indifferent, continuous. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the kind of stillness that only exists after things go exactly the way they were supposed to. My phone buzzed. A text from my son, "I'm proud of you. You know that, right?" I typed back, "I know. Now come take me to lunch. I barely ate in my own restaurant." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "There's a place I know on the West Village." I laughed out loud on the sidewalk, which startled a man walking a terrier, who looked at me with mild alarm. "Sorry," I told him, still smiling. He shook his head and walked on. I put my phone away and started walking. 20-some years ago, I had stood on a corner not far from here with a food handler's permit and the address of a restaurant that was hiring, figuring out what direction the numbers ran. I had been, by every external measure, nobody of consequence. I had known even then that the external measure was not the only one that existed. Sometimes the most important thing you can do in a room is let people show you who they are before you show them who you are. Not as a tactic. Not as a trap. But because clarity is a form of respect for yourself and even, occasionally, for them. The people who count, I have found, are the ones who treat you the same way whether they think it matters or not. Everything else is just a conversation waiting to be corrected.